Hi guys, Mimi G here. Today I'm going to be walking you through a sew along from McCall's 8341. I'm going to be doing view A, so let's get started. Now if you're new to sewing or you just need a refresher course, I do have a sewing basics video which I link in the description box below. Feel free to watch that first, then come sew along with me. Now if you're completely new to sewing or you want to learn more, I do have an online sewing and design school called sewitacademy.com. The first 5 classes are completely free if you sign up for our trial, so make sure and check that out. All right guys, we're going to be doing McCall's 8341. I'm going to be doing view A. Now there's really no difference aside from the length on these views and the sleeve on A. We have a sleeveless version, a narrow sleeve version, but I really like sort of this sleeve. So this is the one I'm going to be doing for the sew along. Now on the back of the envelope, don't forget you always have a list of suggested fabrics. So this is actually designed for a woven. You can use, as it says in the back, a stable knit. So a stable knit is something like a ponte that doesn't have a whole lot of stretch, and it basically works very much like a woven. So I'm going to be using a stable knit for mine, but you have a lot of suggestions. This is designed for a woven fabric. So you're also going to have a list of any notions. In this case, we're going to need an invisible zipper, at least 22 inches long, and 3/4 yards of 3/8 of an inch wide elastic. All right, let's go over the pattern pieces that you need to cut. For a dress, this is going to seem like it's a lot of pattern pieces, and it is a lot of pattern pieces. But it's basically because you have to piece your front and back together. It is also a color blocked dress. So although I'm doing view A, I am going to be color blocking it like you see in view B and C. So it really is up to you, right? If you want to color block it, then you're going to want to pay attention to what you're cutting. So if you're doing a left and a right side and you're going to color block it, you want to make sure that all your left pieces are cut one color, your right pieces are cut one color. If you're going to do the whole thing out of just one fabric, then you really don't need to worry about it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with the pattern pieces. This is pattern piece number 12 and 11. This is our front and back neck facings. You could cut this even if you're color blocking out of any color because it's going to be on the inside, doesn't matter. Then you've got pattern piece number 9 and 10. This is your right front facing and then your upper left front facing. You're going to cut one of fabric and one of interfacing. I cut one out of one fabric and one out of the other because, like I said, I'm color blocking it, but this is a facing and it really doesn't matter because it's going on the inside. So I just did want to point it out because mine will be 2 different fabrics. Then we got pattern piece number 5. This is the upper right back. If you're doing view A, then you're just going to cut one out of your fabric. If you're doing a contrast, right, a color blocked version, then you're going to cut one out of whatever your contrast is. So I'll tell you how I did it. And Lord knows, it might not even be right. I don't know. We're going to see when we piece this together. But I did cut this when I was tired. I basically did all of my right pieces, one fabric, and all of my left pieces, the other color. And so hopefully when we piece this sucker together, it looks right. Then you got pattern piece number 6. This is the upper left back. You're going to cut one out of fabric or one out of contrast. Then we've got pattern piece number 2. This is the upper left front. You're going to cut one. Then we've got pattern piece number 8. This is the left side back. You're going to cut one. Then we have pattern piece number 3. This is the lower left front. You're going to cut one. Then we got pattern piece number 7. This is the lower left back. You're going to cut one. We've got pattern piece number 13. This is our sleeve. You're going to cut 2. If you're color blocking, then you might want to cut one out of one color and one out of the other color. Then we got pattern piece number 4. This is the right back, and you're going to cut one. And finally, we have pattern piece number 1, and this is the right front. You're also going to cut one. Now, once everything is cut and you've interfaced your facings, we can start sewing. All right, we're starting with pattern piece number 1, which is our right front. So I went ahead and made my dart. You guys should go ahead and make your dart. There's one dart here, so make sure that you do that. And now you're gonna gather. So you should have marked 2 dots. We're gonna gather between these 2 dots. So go ahead and do 2 rows of basting stitches so that we can gather this area here. All right, so I've done my 2 rows of gathering stitches. We're not gonna gather it just yet. We're gonna go ahead and also make our dart in our upper left front. We're gonna pin this to our right front. So I'm gonna go ahead and place these right sides facing. And you also have notches, right? So make sure that you transferred notches, dots. It's gonna be really important for this one. All right, so you should have on your right front some dots. You should have the same dots on your other fabric too if you're using two different fabrics. We're gonna stitch from the very top to that very first dot, and then we're gonna sew between these two dots here. It's kind of hard to see because my fabric is so dark. And then essentially we are leaving this space open because the dress has that really beautiful chest opening, and that's where our facing is gonna go. But we do need to stitch from the very top down to the dot, and then again between these two dots. I'm gonna stitch until I get to my dot. Back stitch, and I want you to break your thread. And now we're gonna move down and then sew between the other two dots. Now you're gonna take your lower left front and we're going to pin it to the upper left side of our bodice. And you have notches, so make sure that you are matching up your notches. And you're gonna move, just make sure that this is completely out of the way, the other side. That's why we didn't stitch all the way to the end, right? Because we still need that seam allowance right there. And pin. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and just head to your sewing machine. You're just gonna do a straight stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so we've attached the lower front left to the top. Now we're gonna go ahead and pull our gathering stitches so that this piece fits onto this piece. Okay, that looks about right. I'm gonna go ahead and tie off my threads, and then I'll adjust my gathers before I pin it. Okay, so now I'm just gonna put these right sides facing, and you do have a notch on both your pieces, so you can line that up. Okay, now that we've pinned it, we can go ahead and stitch this together. So I'm gonna start at the hem, and I'm gonna work my way up, stop at that dot with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now it looks like it makes sense, right? We still have this opening here, right? Because that's gonna be open. We're gonna do our facing. That's gonna be really cute. So let's set this aside and let's work on the back. So you're gonna grab pattern piece number 4 and 5. So pattern piece number 4, you have a dart, a fish dart. So go ahead and do your fish dart. Then we're gonna go ahead and attach pattern piece 5 to pattern piece 4. Okay, now we have our dart. So we can go ahead and attach pattern piece number 5 to pattern piece number 4. You're gonna attach pattern piece number 5 to pattern piece number 4. You have double notches, so just align there and pin. Okay, now back to your sewing machine, and you're just gonna stitch this using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, you can go ahead and set this aside for 1 second. You're gonna grab pattern piece number 7 and 8, and we're gonna join those. So with right sides facing, you should have double notches. Okay, so make sure that you're pinning there. And you should have a dot, so make sure and you pin at the dot. Okay, now we're gonna stitch this together again. Just a straight stitch, you're using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm gonna start at the hem and work my way up, stopping at the dot. All right, now we're gonna pin pattern piece number 6 to 7 and 8. And you have notches, so you wanna make sure that you are aligning those notches, right sides facing. So the reason we don't sew all the way to the top is because we need some of this seam allowance. So I'm just moving one out of the way so I can pin. Okay, now we're going to stitch this together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, then we'll continue with the other side. Okay, so while we're here, we're going to go ahead and do the other side so you also have a notch there. So you're just going to pin it, and we're basically going to do the same thing but to this side. All right, so I went ahead and pressed my seams open. That way you get a really nice, crisp line. Now I wanted to mention that I generally don't serge, and you guys know this. I don't serge when I'm doing sew-alongs. That's just because it's just a lot. But I do want to mention that with this particular pattern, if you do plan to serge your fabric, you need to serge these pieces individually before you start to sew them together. You know, a lot of times, like maybe this seam here, you could do it and stitch it, but because we're opening our seams flat, you would need to serge the pieces individually and then sew them together. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and start combining our back pieces and add our invisible zipper. So we're gonna go ahead and insert our invisible zipper. So I'm gonna do mine slightly different than you're gonna see if you're following the instructions in the pattern. This is just my preferred method of inserting an invisible zipper. It's the same way I do it in all of my videos. So if you've seen one of my videos before, you already know this method. So instead of placing each side individually, I like to sew and baste my center back seam first. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pin my entire center back seam. I'm gonna use a different color pin where my zipper is gonna stop, just so that I know that. And you have 3 notches for your center back. So the first step that I do is I'm going to sew from my hem all the way up to where my zipper is gonna stop using a normal length 2.5 stitch, 5/8 of an inch from the cut edge, right? Because that's our seam allowance. Then I'm gonna back stitch and I'm gonna cut my thread. Then I'm gonna baste from here all the way up to the neckline using a basting stitch. So whatever longest stitch your machine has, I think mine does up to a 5. And we're not gonna back stitch here or at the very top. Okay, so I pressed my seams open. I'm gonna go ahead and, I always buy an extra long zipper, or I go up a little further than it tells me to stop where my zipper goes, simply because I like having my zipper pull completely out of the way. So I'll start with my zipper above, and then I just leave that there and cut it at the end when I'm attaching my facing. So what we're gonna do now is I'm placing my zipper onto my center back seam, and then I'm really just gonna push everything to one side because we're gonna work on one seam allowance at a time. And right now we're just gonna baste this down, and I wanna make sure that the middle of my zipper is along the seam line. Don't worry about this being exact, it really is just to hold it in place. Okay, now you're gonna turn this over and you're gonna work from the bottom all the way up. Again, only on your seam allowance. Okay, now I want you to remove the basting stitch, which is that very first stitch that we did. That's why I didn't want you to backstitch at the bottom, so you can pull it out easily. Okay, I switched over to my invisible zipper foot. If you're just using a regular zipper foot, then switch out to that and go ahead and open your zipper. Okay, so working on one side, we're gonna go ahead and stitch close to our zipper teeth. So the reason that this is so handy is because it has little grooves down here that sort of help you place your zipper teeth there, and you can guide it much easier than if you're just using your normal zipper foot. But if you are using your normal zipper foot, no biggie. As you're stitching, you want to be close to your zipper teeth, but not too close. And you want to slightly open up your coils as you're stitching. You also have the option of pressing this. Like if you, before you start, if you want to press your zipper, you can press your coils so they're not so coiled to one side. And that'll help you get a little closer. So I'm going to go back to my normal length stitch. Okay, so now you're gonna turn this around and starting at this end, work your way up, doing the same exact thing. Okay, so if you've done your invisible zipper correctly, then it should be invisible, meaning you do not see it. If you see too much of your zipper tape, that means that when you're stitching on that second part after we basted it, you're not stitching close enough to your zipper teeth. So you're gonna see your zipper tape. You want to not be able to see your zipper at all when it's closed. You'll also want to try and make sure that you align seams as best as possible. Now, the reason I did mine, although I always do my invisible zippers like this, but specifically here, is whenever you want to match up a seam line, sometimes even at the waist, like if you have a waistline in a sheath dress or a dress that has a waist seam, you want those seams to match up, right? You don't want one seam up here and one seam down here. And that can't happen when you're putting in an invisible zipper because your fabric shifts. So this way, it just makes it easier if I baste it to make sure that my seam is gonna match. So we have that connecting seam here and a connecting seam here, and it's exactly in the same place that it should be. So now we're gonna go ahead and attach our shoulders. So we're gonna be doing front to back at the shoulder. And then we're gonna do our sleeves. Now, the instructions have you sew on your sleeves as a set-in sleeve, but I prefer to do my sleeves with a flat method, so that's the way that I'm gonna do it. So go ahead and align your shoulders and pin. And then you're just gonna go ahead to your sewing machine and you're just gonna stitch your shoulders using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so my shoulders are done and we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do, like I said, a flat sleeve insertion as opposed to a set-in sleeve. I actually do this with a lot of my wovens, like button-up shirts. I prefer the traditional way of putting in a sleeve, which is the flat method. I always find it a little easier. Sometimes I do the set-in sleeve. It really just depends on what I'm working on. So I have the right side facing up, facing me. I'm going to place my sleeve so that right sides are facing, and I'm going to pin at my notches first. Okay, so on your pattern you have dots, right? So that's why it's also important not to just do your notches, but to also transfer your dots because it does help you. If you're pinning at your notches and then pinning at that dot, you can sort of work in sections. So like in this section here, I know that I can just sew and just lightly pull a little bit to ease that in. Here, I don't have to ease much. That's not a problem. Here, I'm gonna have to do a little bit more easing. So I generally will just clip into my armscye, not the sleeve, but the armhole. I'm gonna do a couple of little clips here, and that's gonna spread out as I'm sewing, and it'll ease this part of the sleeve cap in for me. Okay, so now you can see that I made all of these little slashes into my armhole, not the sleeve, because we're easing the sleeve cap in. And so now as I'm sewing, that will spread and it'll allow me to ease my sleeve in without having to create any gathering stitches to sort of ease that in. So now I'm gonna head to my sewing machine and I'm gonna stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're gonna pin and sew your other sleeve the same way. Okay, once your sleeves are in, you're gonna go ahead and pin your entire side seam. So I've gone ahead and done that. I started at my hem, I matched up my notches, I pinned all the way up to my armhole and then down my sleeve, And you're gonna pin both your side seams and your sleeve the same way. Now we can sew in one continuous stitch, right? So you're gonna start at your hem, you're gonna back stitch, you're gonna stitch all the way up till you get to your armhole. You're gonna slightly pivot, and then you're gonna sew down your sleeve and backstitch at the end. You're gonna do that for both side seams. Okay, once you have your side seams done, we're gonna go ahead and attach our facing. So I'm gonna set that aside for a second. I want you to grab piece 9 and 10, which is our right and our left facing pieces. And we're going to, you'll notice that one is longer than the other. You'll also notice that on your opening. One should have a little more give than the other. So what we're gonna do is we're going to place them right sides facing, and you should have marked little dots. So you're gonna sew from the top to that dot, and then on the bottom, you're gonna sew from the bottom to the dot. I'm gonna go ahead and pin just to keep it together. And again, from bottom to the dot, top to the dot. Okay, so I pressed my seams open. What we're gonna do is we're gonna place this right sides facing, and we're gonna pin it in place. If you cut the right pieces, then you know that the color corresponds to that side. So the green is on my green side, and this little terracotta is on the other side. So I'm gonna go ahead and match up the seams, and then I'm gonna pin. I'll start on one side, and you do have notches, so that should help you. Okay, now I'll do the other side. So now you're just gonna stitch starting at one end, right? You're just gonna go from where you have that stitching line that you can sort of see. And you're gonna stitch from one end to the other, and then you're gonna do the same thing on this side, from this end to this end. Okay, so I'm gonna put my needle, you see where my stitching is? I'm gonna put my needle right where I stopped. Okay, so now you're gonna turn this around, and you're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I went ahead and also understitched. You guys should always know to do that with any facing. And I pressed it to the inside, so now it's nice and clean. You have a nice clean finish. I went ahead also and grabbed my front and back facings for my neck, and I stitched them together at the shoulders and pressed my seams open. Now we're gonna go ahead and place it right sides facing. I'm gonna open my zipper up. And I'm gonna pin my shoulders first because I wanna match those seams. And then you also have notches here in the front. Once you've stitched all the way around, you're then gonna stitch down the back, right? Because we need to stitch the back of our facing down to our zipper. Then after that, you can trim your corners, and we can turn our facing to the inside. Okay, once you're done with your neck facings, we're gonna go ahead and do our sleeve, if you're doing sleeve A with the elastic like I am. If you're doing one of the other sleeves, then you would just turn under your hem and stitch it in place. So you have a fold line on your pattern piece for your sleeve, and now it has you turn under 1/4 inch and then turn again along that fold line. Well, I would normally serge and then fold, mostly because my fabric, the one that I'm using, has a little bit of weight to it. And so if I fold under my 1/4 inch and then fold again, it might just be a little too thick there for me. Then I'm inserting the elastic, and then I'm gonna have all that gather and fullness there. So I'm gonna just be turning and stitching my casing. But if you're using a thinner fabric and you want a really nice clean finish, then you certainly should turn under 1/4 inch and then turn on that fold line, and you're going to stitch close to that folded edge. Don't forget to leave an opening so that you can insert your elastic at least 1 inch wide. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and insert our elastic. I'm gonna pin one end so it doesn't get lost in there, because I almost did just lose it. And you're just gonna keep sifting until you get to the other opening. Okay, you're gonna remove your safety pin. You're gonna bring your ends together and you're going to stitch through both layers to secure your elastic, and then you're just gonna close your opening. Okay, once you're done with both your sleeves, the only thing left for you to do is to finish the hem of your dress. I would try it on just to make sure that the length is good and where you want it, and then you're gonna turn under the hem allowance and stitch it in place, and you are all done. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this sew along. Make sure and follow me at Mimi G Style on Instagram and tag me in your pictures. And also follow at McCall Pattern Company on Instagram. This video will also be available on McCall's YouTube page. Until next time, peace.